Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Sparking Interest podcast here at the ASFP. Recently, we've had some interesting and notable people come to talk to us about a cross-section, a broad cross-section of subjects. And today is no exception, and a subject matter that I know all of our members and probably a lot of you that watch these podcasts are interested in. So today I'm joined by the notable Paul Morrell, one half of the Morrell Day Report, which I'm sure a lot of you would have seen or read or certainly heard about or been involved in discussions. And Paul's very kindly agreed to come and see us here in our little corner of the West Midlands to talk about the report. And we've got a few questions from the membership. We put a small little note out to the team to see what their thoughts and questions were. So really, without further ado, Paul Morrell, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the ASFP. It's very kind of you to come, because the last time we spoke to you, you were in France, and I hope you haven't made an exception to come here.
No,
Southern France to Coventry is an interesting switch. So. I know you've spent a lot of time probably talking to people about the report. It certainly, when it was published, LinkedIn sort of went a bit, it lit up, to use the term. It was commented on, pushed around. There's a certain quarter of people on LinkedIn that pride themselves on being the people's poets of LinkedIn commentary. And they all commented on it. But really, like all of these things, the truth is with the person who created it. And I think it's great that you've come in to talk to us. And it's clearly a report that generated a lot of interest and a lot of comment. But of course, with all of these things, I suppose the value in them is what outcomes it generates. And at the ASFP, we made a sort of tactical decision a few years ago to try and talk less, which is ironic considering what we're doing, and do more. And that's sort of a trajectory we've been on since. So developing new training, developing new technical guidance, etc. And that's a trajectory that we'll probably stay on for quite some time. And for you, I suppose, spending all that time on it with your colleague, you're hoping that it will obviously generate outcomes, because I suppose otherwise,
that's why I'm here.
What's the point?
Yeah.
So, in terms of your involvement and the journey you went on to develop it, how did that start, and what was the journey like?
I started with a phone call. In lockdown, or just before lockdown, I can't remember, asking if I would be, if they could put me forward to look at this, and in a moment that I've occasionally lived to regret, but not overall, said yes. Hugely important subject. I had not wanted to get involved in the Grenfell issue much earlier when I'd been approached by the department, because I thought at that stage the only interest was the hunt for the guilty, and I didn't think that was any part of my interest. But I was interested in the prevention of a recurrence. I'm hugely interested in it. The next reaction, I guess, was this is a whole world I didn't know existed. I'm 75 years old. I've been on building sites since I could walk, because my dad was a builder. And I suddenly got this blizzard of acronyms, and processes and so on, which I didn't know about. And the first thought was I missed a whole part of life that I should have caught onto. But when I talked to friends on the design and construction side, which is where I spent my life, it was not known to them either. So if I said to an architect friend, AVCP system, how do you make sure that the product satisfied that? They have really very few of them know what I was talking about. And I would guess, over a long working life, that I might be able to name 6, maybe 10 practices that I thought would have the competence internally to be in charge of this world. So that was the first reaction. We have 2 bubbles. A kind of design and construction bubble, and a kind of standards certification accreditation world, and they hardly meet.
Yeah.
So that one of the recommendations, therefore, is how you bring those 2 worlds together, but also be realistic about how much one can understand in other people's worlds. And that lies in the issue of complexity. It's massively complex. And unnecessarily so, I would say. I mean, we can't have everything. It's true that nobody went to medical school and said, well, this body is very complicated, can't we make it simpler? Some things are just complex. But I think there's needless complexity in the process. So that was the next overwhelming offer. So those two things really, that how much isn't known and needs to be known, if the whole system is going to work. And it fundamentally is a system, which makes things more complicated because nobody's terribly good at systems thinking. And secondly, that it simply has to be simplified. And then you kind of move on to the processes. Okay, having said that, what next? And I suppose we were surprised to find how some of the fundamental questions hadn't been answered, and apparently even asked, of the issues of EU alignment, which I recognise are politically toxic. And I wasn't naive enough to think that a civil servant would say to me, oh, we've decided this, because it's not for them to decide. But there are lots of very difficult questions in politics which you can't answer in public, but if you don't answer them in private, you can't make policy.
Yes.
And I think the whole issue of EU alignment was one. And more surprising, I suppose, to ask an official what marking is for, and to be told it was for the creation of a single market. And then to say, but as we're not in that single market, what's it for now? And to get no answer better than, well, that's a different question. But it's the one we're asking. And I wonder whether it had been sufficiently asked internally, as we imported basically the whole EU system into UK law at the point of exit. Can we produce something better? Should we produce something better? So that makes things more complicated still. And the report has a number of what I call determining principles, which if you don't answer these, you can't really move very fast ahead. So those are the overwhelming opening impressions. And, what the hell can we do to try and sort of open some of those doors to find a way ahead?
Okay. And I think one of the things our members have sort of have been looking for, certainly post 2017, is some sort of steer on what they are meant to test to. And recently we've had this debate, or this question that's now been raised about the proposed removal of 476 from ADB and realigning to 1634 and classification standards 13501. And you've got the UKCA challenge as well. That's been pushed back a couple of times.
Yep.
Then it's announced that there's a certain level of harmonisation, but construction products won't be included in that. So the same problem still exists effectively in terms of what to do. Did your work and findings sort of conclude on, what was your general conclusion on how we simplify? How, because it's interesting. I'll try and frame it in a way. We're the ASFP. We represent passive fire.
Yep.
We represent passive fire products. We represent the installation of passive fire products and systems. We represent the people that do testing and certification of them, and even checking of them. But quite often people will think, well, ASFP, they must have an opinion on things to do with the assessment of buildings. It's the debate about two staircases in buildings over a certain height, and there's generally a perception that if you work in fire, you have an opinion, you have knowledge and opinion on anything to do with fire, whether that's risk assessments or And my counterpart at the FIA, that's the Fire Industry Association, who predominantly focus on active fire as opposed to passive, has the same problem. So they'll get asked questions about, what's your thoughts on, fire dampers, and he'll say, well, I don't know, because we're active. And that creates a challenge for us, because sometimes we don't have an opinion on something. We may have an opinion on whether there should be two staircases in buildings above X number of metres, but in some respects we're more interested in making sure that escape route is protected.
Yep.
which is what our expertise is. So you have misconceptions of where people's skills and knowledge or authorities lie, as much as you have these misconceptions about whether something should be tested in a certain way or how that would be applied. And what was your general conclusion from doing the work?
Well, there's a lot in there, so let me try and...
I know, I'm sorry.
It's all right. Let me try and unpack...
It's a big box of chocolates.
Unpack it a bit. But maybe the framework for this discussion maybe is... Some of this is clearer to me since finishing the report than it was in the report.
Yeah.
What are the elements of a system that might work? And I think that's fairly simply summarised. I failed totally to come up with the Minister's desire for 3 big things.
Yeah.
And the report, I think Chandra described the report on your broadcast as detailed, which is probably code for dense and difficult and so on. And I know that. I don't quite apologise for that, because it was quite a deliberate decision that you can't reduce this thing to 3 big things.
Yeah.
And I hope that it might become both a map and a menu for reform. And Annalisa, I think, shared that wish. We certainly had no desire to spend our summer and much more of the following winter than we intended on something that would go onto a shelf. So we saw a kind of framework that might work, and it starts with standards. Do the standards deliver in that great advertising slogan what it says on the tin? And for the most part, they do, but they're full of problems, and the way they're produced is full of problems, and they're very slow to develop, and all of that is in the report. But if you don't know, in that awful cliche, what good looks like to start with, you're in trouble. And standards, therefore, go to the very root of things. There's a standard for a product. There's a standard for how to test it. There's a standard for the people who do the testing. There's a standard for how they're accredited. And there's a standard for how the people who check the accrediting are. So you've just got a hierarchy of standards. You have to have that. You have to have an effective testing system. And I'm sure we'll come back to some of the weaknesses in the system, which are spelled out in the report. And the way the cabs proceed. In which my general conclusions didn't share the cynicism about cabs. You pay them enough money, they'll give you the answer you want. I don't think that's true, but there are inconsistencies in practice, and in what they're required to do, which I think we can come back to. There absolutely has to be an effective enforcement system, and what we start to see here is how the job breaks down between the industry and government, to my mind. We'll come back to that, but most of the running here has to be made by the industry. But the conversation shouldn't be to government, what are you going to do about? It should be, we want to make buildings safer. We think we know how to do that. And if there's anybody in Whitehall that knows what a safe building is made of, I've not met them. And why would you expect to find them, in Whitehall, if we don't know what makes a building safe? So, but there has to be an effective enforcement system. And more than once, in all the conversations we had before publishing, the comment was made to us, could you please try enforcement first? And it may be a surprise to government that people quite like enforcement. But, if you want to run your business properly, and I think most people get up in the day wanting to do that, you don't want to compete with people who are not paid by the same rules. They should be taken out.
Yes. And
there hasn't been, to my knowledge, to our knowledge, and indeed I was talking to OPSS yesterday, and to their knowledge, a single prosecution under the Construction Products Regulation. They've never been enforced, really.
No.
So who knows whether they might have worked or whether they might work in the future. You then get on to the point you're making, which is where knowledge is gathered together. Do we have a kind of centre of excellence anywhere? And I think the final thing that we need is a way of learning our lessons. I think a very loud conclusion from the Grenfell inquiry from Morbic, and I have no special knowledge, but it'd be astonishing if almost printed on the front cover isn't we do not learn our lessons. And I think we don't learn our lessons because there's nowhere for them to be learned. None of this stuff comes together somewhere.
Yes.
So in terms of how you still make progress, I think it's a huge mistake to say to government, what are you going to do next? But it would be helpful to have the direction of travel on some things, which is those things which are for government. And of course, the UK CE marking thing has been a fiasco. It was entirely predictable. And one of the first conversations with the minister when we first met a month or two after starting was, you're going to have to move that date. But please don't just kick the can down the road. Move the date with a plan for how it can come back. And we've probably got to that point now, so let's not build it furthermore. But I'm sure your members are saying when you tell them they should do more work, well, we got ready for UKCA marking. We spent the money on it, and I've lost credibility in my boardroom now, because they're always, when I tell the next plan, they say, well, that's what you said about marking.
Yeah.
But there's one thing that doesn't change, which is what makes a product safe,
Yes.
and what makes a building safe.
Yeah.
We don't need government to tell us that. And indeed, if we invite them to tell us, we might not like the answer. So I think all the time, the answer to what should happen next is an industry move to say we can make buildings safer. We think we can define them. What we need for government, therefore, is very clear definition of the duties that lie on all of us. And I think this is fundamental and will change everything. They're coming at us, whole new responsibilities are coming at us. So I think in talking to the industry, at whatever level in the supply chain, my message is the same, I think, which is you've got this juggernaut coming at you, the Building Safety Act, and although the secondary legislation isn't clear, we know at a high level what it will ask for. It will ask you to make sure that you meet the same kind of level of duty that is falling on principal designers and principal contractors. So, and I think this is more powerful force for change than the idea of culture. I mean, I'm a huge believer in culture, but we've been waiting for the industry's culture to change since the pyramids were built. It's a slow process. But what is landing in boardrooms in a very powerful way is new risks, new responsibilities.
Yeah.
And I think, therefore, that if you say to the industry that you're now required, and the report says on two things, the general safety requirement and safety critical, which I'm sure we'll come on to, that you're required to meet a general safety requirement. Our first instinct about that was, well, hang on a minute, you can't build everything on a term you can't define, which is too vague. And I kind of came full circle, because you can never answer the question, well, what's controversial about requiring products to be safe? And secondly, unless you're prescriptive about everything, how do you make sure that you haven't left a huge loophole in the system? And an example I quote was, because while we were doing the report, an organisation in Scandinavia launched an insulation made of popcorn. And having checked it wasn't April the 1st and discovered it was quite a serious thing, you think, well, whoever sitting in Whitehall or anywhere else would say we need a regulation to control insulation made of popcorn?
Actually made from
popcorn.
Popcorn.
Mm. I don't believe it was April the 1st. And
sweet or salty?
Customer's choice, I suspect.
Okay.
So, but it's a potentially ridiculous example, except for people who make it, of that you can never contemplate.
Yeah.
What might come next, and the whole problem of innovation.
No, I mean it is. It's never be surprised about being surprised, I think.
So, have you used, as a manufacturer of popcorn insulation, reasonable skill and care?
Yes.
To make sure that it's safe. You can't look in more and more prescription for what that looks like.
No.
But you can, as an industry, start to say what we as a group think, what your members as a trade of the trade association think we should do to make sure that first our products and then our systems are safe, and answer that question. Is there a standard? If there isn't, what do we do? Is there a method of testing? Is it fit for purpose? And if there isn't, what do we do? How often should we test? And before going on to market, and indeed fundamentally after we're on the market. What does a good risk assessment look like for product by product? And that will be different in different products and different sectors and so on. We can make huge progress on all of that, and should do. And then say to government, this is what we can do. This is what we need you to do so that it works, so that people can't shortcut round it, so that it's effectively enforced. So the infrastructure into which we have to operate, the whole accreditation infrastructure is fit for purpose. That's what you have to do. Mm. So it's what I used to call in my brief spell in Whitehall 10, 12 years ago, something for something. We can do this if you do that. And I think there's quite a clear split, clearer than it was in truth when I was doing the report. A very clear split between what we expect government to do and should do, and what we have to ask it to do, so that all the stuff that primarily falls on us, the definition of a safe product and a safe building, can land effectively.
Yeah, I mean, it was never government's job to do it. I mean, I think Dame Judith actually mentioned that in her summary. It's industry's job to sort itself out, and as organisations like us, we represent those sections of industry, and therefore we should take a lead, as we have done within a series of those in the working groups and everywhere else. You talk about products, and recently CCPI have sort of started to gain more momentum. We've actually got Amanda coming in to sit in the seat where you are in a few weeks to talk about CCPI. The uptake, I'm not sure where they are with uptake, but it's clearly going to take time to get every product correctly assessed and the correct descriptors written out. I mean, it's a similar. I've worked in British and European standards, but I also worked in US NFPA, and listing and labelling, under UL, for instance, is a different animal compared to how we've been operating some of the BSCN stuff, and it does actually sort of align itself more to CCPI as a system, in terms of the description of the product, its performance, and the like. What do you have any thoughts on that system? Do you think is it something that you would have recommended or have recommended? Is it in line with where you think it should be?
I do, and I have.
Yeah.
For no more powerful reason that I think it's the best thing we've got.
Yeah, of
so
course.
far.
Yeah.
If it's perfect at launch, it would be the first thing that ever was.
Yes.
But the GK Chesterton expression I'm very fond of: if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. Which I don't think means go off.
No, not
head off and
deliberately do it,
but
badly.
don't wait for perfection. If you know that fundamentally it's worthwhile, and if following this route won't lead to the wrong conclusion. So I think that in terms of just saying to the industry, get on with it.
Yeah.
I've still got a couple of fears. One is exactly whether we're clear. What only works if government does the right thing, and when we're going to see that, and what it looks like. But that's not a huge amount of the landscape, I don't think. As I say, what makes safe should not be influenced by that. How you demonstrate that it's safe, how you accredit it as safe, and so that may well change. But I think that there's a plan of work kind of set out in the review report of things that we need to do, and one of them is start to labelling stuff. The generalisations of what has to happen are quite easy. The fear is that if you tell people to rush off and do all of that there won't be any kind of template, any kind of pattern to it.
Yes.
And it won't be organised. And this industry has a terrible habit of addressing in lots of different rooms 30%, and often the same 30% of the problem, and coming up sometimes with competing answers, but very rarely with an answer that covers most of the problem and is generally bought into. So I think we need some kind of templates. What does a good risk assessment look like? Whatever sector you're working in, what are the questions you should be asking? And then trade associations like this will say, okay, fitting into that and specific to what we do, here's a proposition for that. So I think that needs doing. So, and I think the vertical way of organising that is the clues are in the approved documents.
Yes.
And again, it sets out in the review that the guidance for fire in the approved document splits, I think, into three categories. Compartmentation.
Yep.
Probably number one, because if the compartment holds, for the most part, people aren't badly harmed. The systems that go into that, the building that relate to fire, so smoke, detection, protection, smoke ventilation, and so on, and then means of escape.
Yeah.
And one of the hugely encouraging things that I've seen is the passive fire people taking possession of the compartmentation issue and starting to work together to say what should happen, to make sure that a compartment is both constructed in a way that's fit for purpose and stays that way.
Yeah.
Actuate, which is the group that combines the trade associations, professional institutions looking at services, are doing this, taking the same approach towards the systems. So slowly you can start to organise the work, and then you can start to think, okay, what products go into that element, and so on, and you can brigade it. That's the vertical access content. The horizontal access then is time. At each stage of the process, through the domains of manufacture, accreditation, design and specification, handling and installation, maintenance and operation, and so on. What should happen at each stage? Which is a long way of getting back to the CCPIs. It takes care of that whole bit about, is what arrives at site what has been tested? Can I be reasonably reliable that it is therefore the thing that it says on the tin?
Yeah.
And if that whole system operates, you've taken care of a huge bit of that life cycle of the product. We still need to sort out that when it arrives to be marketing, it is what it claims to be in the first place, and we can have faith in that. But as long as the people who are launching it believe and then follow the system, you can have confidence that what arrives on site will arrive with honesty. It's supposed to do what the claims of what it can do are clear. The information that you need to make sure that you can secure those claims are clear, is clear. And I think that's a big part of the problem. And one of the appendices of the report I did with Annalisa was to look at what's alleged in Grenfell. Thank God, not our job, and certainly not our right to make any judgments about Grenfell. And as I said before, that was of limited interest to me. It was prevention in the future that I'm more interested in. But we did say to ourselves, if any of these allegations are capable of being true and they lead on to harm, we should start to find a solution to them. And a lot of that is in the claims made for products.
Yeah.
The lack of information about how you can use them securely and so on. The importance of workmanship, which we keep coming back to. And I think, therefore, the CPA has really upped its game in terms of launching that as a plan.
Yeah.
It will not be perfect.
No.
But I would have more ambition for it than they do, I think. And again, the report suggests that it could be something like the Advertising Standards Authority. It could be almost a quasi-regulatory body. But for that, more people need to be in it. And you would hope that eventually it will become a condition of membership of the CPA. If not that you sign up to the process, that you absolutely sign up to the principles. And then you get, again, this whole burden of reasonable skill and care. If something goes wrong, what did you do as a business to exercise reasonable skill and care in the honest marketing of your product? I signed up for the CCPI would be one answer.
Yeah.
If you didn't, you've got a bigger conversation.
Of course. Yeah.
So I think that, the image, which is much simpler to describe than to live by, is that if the duties are right all the way down the chain, your principal contractor, who has a habit possibly of changing specifications for commercial interest, will be aware when they're doing so.
Equal and or approved.
I have no objection to that.
No.
And I actually don't think that you don't want the government to tell you, I'm sorry, you can't substitute a product once you've chosen something, possibly at random. But if you change it, you're holding the baby now.
Well, they changed it originally to stop, I don't know if fraud is too strong a word, but when it was if something was specified and it was you couldn't change it. As a sales director, you would spend all your time on the golf course, making sure that all the main contractors were, or the architects were specifying your products. I mean, specification sales was a big industry years ago before they created something that allowed to change a product or be equal or approved to that was originally specified. So you sort of solve one problem, but create another to a certain
because it's
degree.
not equal. Which is what I think CCPI should do.
Yes.
Which makes sure that if you're going, there will always be people who shortcut.
Of course.
There'll be people who misbehave, and as I say again, it's important that we know that they can be exposed and taken out. You can't compete with them.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't want to. Where you want to pitch your business is entirely your choice. And most people want to pitch their business in a way that they can make a good, honest living, serving the interests of their customers. And that's I think your job as a trade association.
Absolutely.
Is to help them to be in that situation.
Yeah.
So there'll always be such people.
Yeah.
But probably marketing on the golf course is a slightly old-fashioned idea now.
It is. It's a massively old-fashioned.
I have no objection if that gets you into the room.
But it was getting into the room exclusively, and once you're in the room, there was no opportunity for change. And I know that's, historically, that's one of the reasons why they started to come up with that. Saying that, I had an interesting conversation at a Build UK meeting with a lot of tier ones. My question was, show me how you're qualified as procurement, as primary procurers of products and systems and services. Show me how you would swap out from one product to another without telling me it's not a commercial decision. And it was very hard for them to answer the fact that they swapped for any other reason than what they swapped to was a more cost-effective change.
So I get back to the importance. I mean, they will always make commercial decisions. They have a commercial component to them, but I get back to the importance of enforcement. They should be aware, and I think probably are aware now, that I think the expression that we used in the report was careless or thoughtless substitution.
Yeah.
Substitution is not a problem. Careless or thoughtless substitution is.
Of course.
But now they must be aware they've got new duties in doing that. So again, I get back to my reasonable skill in care to make sure a product's safe, and then you're meeting your obligations in the Building Safety Act. Well, I just decided that it was the same because they told me it was. Did you check anything? Did you? I think the nature of procurement, the questions that get asked, will change.
Yes. Certainly
in the responsible part of the market, and the irresponsible part of the market will slowly have to follow or will be exposed.
Yes.
Because we are. I mean, I'm pretty convinced that OPSS in particular, and I'm sure the Building Safety Regulator will be the same. Really want to bring about a new regime.
Mm-hmm.
They simply do not want non-compliant products on the marketplace.
No, and there shouldn't be.
No.
And I think, the CCPI needs to create the environment of which then OPSS can audit against those products. Because, of course, without proper listing and labelling and identification, it's hard for them then to be able to police
Correct.
What that looks like.
Correct.
It's very similar, actually, because, of course, the argument for us or against 476 we're not going to get into today in terms of whether it should be removed from ADB. But of course, back in my early career in construction products in fire, 476 was a 37-page report, and every report looks the same, except on page 17 in paragraph 3 it said the fire test went on until 9 minutes 34 seconds, and then there was a fail within the fail criteria of the test, and the test was stopped. So you've got a 37-page report that tells you that product went for 9 minutes 34 seconds, as opposed to another test report that says the product went for 4 hours and 20 minutes and the test was stopped. And to the untrained eye and to the untrained procurer, decision maker, they look exactly the same. And that was one of the big problems. Testing to European standards and classifying to them and creating a classification report where you effectively had a series of performance against criteria. So in fire, it's 60-minute integrity, 30-minute insulation, and to SA, ambient smoke control, to a known leakage rate. Mm-hmm. Was easier because you could give them that classification report as opposed to a 37-page document which said no one looking for the fact that it only lasted 9.5 minutes. Take that classification report and put it with third-party certification. You can see the evolvement of trying to create more of a robust method of showing how a product performs. The big problem is how then that product is used and applied in terms of what it was tested for and what it's been designed in to do and how it's been applied. Yep. The other big challenge we've seen is we deal in two areas. We deal in product systems. So a damper set, a finished product made up of a series of component parts. Mm-hmm. So the same as a toaster. Damper, a fire curtain set, fire door set of product. And then you have a box of 12 tubes of fire-rated mastic, or a pallet of pink board and a pallet of fire bat. And you bring those together, a whole series of different products. You bring them together. You use intermescent collars for pipes. You use bags for cable trays. You're bringing a collection of different products, all with maybe slightly different test outcomes. Mm-hmm. You're bringing them together to fill a 500 by 500 letterbox with a series of penetrations running through it, and nobody tested that particular configuration using that collection of different products.
And nor can they ever.
And that's the challenge, yeah.
But the challenge comes back to you, in my view.
Yes.
Which is, I'll keep getting back to reasonable skill in care and making sure that something is safe. So, as an industry, you could say, you could satisfy your duty of reasonable skill in care in respect of fire damper by buying this system.
Yes.
By buying this package. But you can't say to somebody that every component of that has to be the thing that's tested, because the following day they can't get it.
No, that's right.
So then you need to go on to say, and if you're going to do it bit by bit, and there's probably too much system testing that tests all the bits and assumes they'll work well when they work together.
Mm-hmm.
But who could tell you better than your own members what the criteria are that you should apply in deciding how to satisfy yourself that a damper that's made out of 72 bits rather than one that's bought in a box is going to do the job? So I keep getting back to that. You work it out. You tell government. Their job is to say your duty is to make sure it's safe. They may add a duty in respect of safety critical products, which I'm sure we'll come back to, because of the consequences of failure. But if we can get the general safety requirement to work, it does a huge amount of heavy lifting, because then the offence would not be, that you didn't do box 3 of AVCP system 2 plus properly. It will be that you didn't exercise reasonable skill and care in making sure your product's safe. You can remove a lot of the regulation, and we were very conscious in doing the review that that everything that you say should be done that isn't done already adds cost, adds burden. So it needs to be effective. And although people say it's expensive, well, if you know a more economic way of making sure people are safe, tell me what it is. But we could take quite a lot of process out, quite a lot of prescriptive detail out by saying that's your obligation. You decide. Ideally industry by industry or sector by sector. Yeah. As I say, what the standards are, how you test to that standard, how often you should do that, and so on. And the AVCP system, the bones of it are quite good, but it bears no relationship to risk. No. That's the problem with it. If you take the highest level of it, there are only 9 products which are totally assessed at that level, and one that's partly assessed at that level, and most of them are coloured cement. So on your first question of what we found when starting out in the exercise, the first surprise, I guess, was there's no relationship between the way something is required to be accredited and the degree of risk it presents. And as we well know, famously, no testing at all for a fire door, because it hadn't yet passed through the harmonised standards in Europe. No. So, as I used somewhat flippantly say, we found there was quite a detailed process by which you should accredit a urinal, certify urinal, but nothing for a fire door. So there was, and it was a big surprise, no such thing as a UK system for testing the safety of construction products. And there should be.
Yeah, of course, absolutely, yeah.
You get to safety critical then to say, if you're going to say to industry, you carry the burden of satisfying yourself that something is being done with reasonable skill and care to be made safe, that's not good enough. If it's not safe, somebody dies or is very seriously injured. So that gets you to safety critical products. And the recommendation of the report is that for those products, in certain uses, we'll come back to no doubt, they should be subjected to the very highest level of accreditation.
Of course.
And surely nobody would think that something which is susceptible to changes of manufacture and so on can be tested once, put on the market, and never tested again.
No, of course not. No.
And most particularly if you start tweaking it, changing it in ways that will affect its performance, still not tested again, that's just dishonest. So we need to recreate a proper relationship between the degree of risk represented by a product and how we make sure that it's placed on the market in a way that keeps it safe, makes it safe and keeps it safe. That again is a question for the industry. I think the idea of safety critical products only makes sense in the context of how they're used and where they're used. We know that certain products can be quite safe in one use, nothing wrong with using an ACM panel for a shop fascia, quite lethal in another. We should say, in what circumstances you can and can't use a product.
It's application.
And what you should do, yeah.
Absolutely.
It keeps coming back to us, in other words.
Yeah.
And I think if we leave that to Whitehall, we would live to regret it.
I would wait a long time as well, probably.
Because they have masters of their own and problems of their own and political questions to answer. So again, I keep getting back to whether something is safe or not, and how we demonstrate that to ourselves to satisfy our duty of care is for us. Whether we're required then to do more than that to demonstrate it publicly is for government. Yeah. Not enough that you do that. Yeah. Because we need to know. Yeah. That if what you're making or how it's used can cause serious harm out there, our duty, government's duty to the public is to make sure that we're given every chance that they can trust what they get. That's for them to decide.
Okay, it's interesting. Fire doors you mentioned is next week is the British Woodworking Federation, they run a fire door safety week every year, and it's next week. We've done a podcast with their head of technical, and had a fantastic conversation with him about all of the challenges. Interestingly, the fire door market in the UK is still very, very 476 heavy, and I think if 476 was to be removed completely, how they support that transition they would probably have a harder task than probably other organisations where their members have moved away probably more from 476 because they operate in bigger markets.
476 might be an example of a couple of other things. If we force government to tell us what to do, we might get a blanket ban on 476.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they're quite jumpy. I think things have calmed down a bit post Grenfell, but they're going to get jumpy again when the Grenfell inquiry report comes out, I suspect. And they don't want to be accused of doing nothing when they know that something's not perfect.
Yes.
So you then get what I wouldn't pass an O level on BS 476, let alone be able to qualify.
It's more of an A level actually.
Quite well. I mean, I wouldn't get that far. What I mean, and I'm hoping the A level is not enough before you start launching it on me.
Yeah.
But in other words, that you don't need to know the technical detail to know that blanket bans that aren't fully aware in the first instance of what's wrong with the status quo and what would be better if you removed it are probably the consequence of over hasty action. It's out to consultation.
Of course. And
for the most part, government does listen to consultation when it's got good sense behind it. So get involved and consult, and where there are gaps in the system where it's better. And you don't want to throw away a whole legacy of a sector actually which seems to work quite well.
Yeah.
And Grenfell, the composite fire doors, disastrous. Timber fire doors, to my recollection, everyone they retrospectively tested passed. Virtually every composite fire door failed, which demonstrates that if you've got a system and it's got some science behind it, and people are required to comply with it, you can keep people safe.
No, absolutely.
And then you need to connect it to installation. And you mentioned third-party schemes. I think the more third-party schemes connect product to system to installation and into its end use, the better.
Yes. I think with standards as well, I came from a sector of the fire industry where it was quite a new, compared to historical sectors of our industry, it was a newer industry, and a British standard was created because at the time the European standard that this group was put into didn't really represent the product well enough. And the standards team that were brought together under BSI to put this standard together were forward thinking enough to actually create two parts. One was specification for the product, and there was a part two, which was a code of conduct for the design, application, installation, service and maintenance, and fault finding of the system. Now, you don't get many product standards that has a code of practice or even a standard within it that tells you how it should be applied, designed in, fitted, and serviced and maintained. And I think a lot of the product standards, especially if they're a finished system, a bespoke or a product made up of a series of component parts, as you mentioned before, they should have second parts that define how they should be designed, where they should be designed in, for what reason, because that how it performs as a product test then dictates how you could use it in application. And you don't see many of those.
You don't, and you don't need to wait for the standard, though, do you?
No. You could create technical
step in.
You could take best practice. You could create best practice guidance documents on it and various other things. But what I'm trying to emphasise is that I think quite often it's been product heavy, as in the standards, as opposed to how they should be designed in the application or how they should be installed, because of course the scope of that is far broader and not something you can pin down to a fire test on a certain day in a certain laboratory.
Yeah, as I say, there are weaknesses in the testing system, but nonetheless, the impact analysis for the Building Safety Act put the number of faults down to the product at less than 1.5%.
Yeah,
I think based on a pretty dodgy sample, to be honest. Is it 1 in 64 or something? They looked at that many, and one was to do with the product, based on one report. But I think that most people would agree that the problem with the product and what it's expected to do is not the biggest problem we face by a long shot.
No.
Honest marketing of it is.
Yes.
Inadequate information about it is.
Absolutely.
And not understanding that, okay, it's been tested, but it's been tested for this situation.
Yeah.
And won't be suitable in that situation. It assumes it's installed like this, and it isn't. You kind of get burdens back on designers more to understand how they use things. And you can never we can't keep building bigger and bigger bits of building until we can find a bit we can't burn down. We don't do that with structures.
It's called castle engineering, isn't it?
Yeah.
You make the walls taller and thicker, but actually the materials are still
correct. We don't do that. We don't do that anymore. We don't work out whether a 9x9 grid still works structurally. We know that it does. So we start putting more science into that. But you can never test everything. So again, the question for the industry is, what testing should be happening at product level or system level to give to defend ourselves against allegation that we didn't take reasonable skill and care. And as I say, the products, for most of the problems really are in, first of all, dishonest marketing or marketing which maybe not deliberately dishonest, but allows a market to develop in an area for which the product was not originally designed.
Yes.
And I think a fundamental issue, and I spoke to to the roofers yesterday, was the claim that manufacturers make that they can't be responsible for how their product is used is a cop-out.
Yeah.
You know why you're making a product. You know what it's designed to do. You know who's buying it.
Yep.
And if people whose specialisation is one thing are buying loads of your product for which is not suitable, you kind of know.
Yes.
So there needs to be an use of reasonable foreseeability, the burden back on the manufacturers. But beyond that, it's the information that's important about how you use it, handle it safely, install it properly, and then maintain and operate it properly.
Yeah.
It's all about information. I don't think dodgy product, in other words, is at the root of our biggest problems.
No, I think you're right. I think it's how it's been interpreted that you find a use for certain things, don't you? And then, like you say, an industry pops up. Okay, we've had a few questions come in. So I'm going to put my glasses on because I am now a man of a certain age, Paul. We'll just have a quick canter through some of these. We sort of discussed the report and obviously what you thought. What do you think? So there was one question, and if you don't want to answer these, you don't have to say it. I reserve my right to use the. Is it the Fifth Amendment?
It's the Fifth, I think.
Yeah, we don't have it.
Fifth,
we don't have it over here, though, do we? It's not. It's an Americanism, but we'll use it anyway for the purposes of this. So one question's come in. It says the lack of any steer or secondary legislation or requirements from His Majesty's government 3 months on from this report being published, which that was commissioned and delivered to DLUC over a year ago. Do you have any? What's your current sort of feeling? Are you frustrated, or is the timescale sort of? Are you used to the timescales in terms of the severity of what the report was talking about?
Yeah, I'm not cited on where they are because there's been practically no discussion with DLUC since the report was delivered. I was fairly frank about a certain reluctance at my age to submit to the sense of priorities in a government department anyway. It is kind of disappointing. I think it's an issue of priorities, and I think the people of Grenfell will be disappointed by that too. And I think DLUC put together a team to really think about product only after the review was presented, which is nearly, I might send it a birthday card. It's coming up 2 years now.
It is.
Okay, and it's not 3 months, it must be 5 since it was actually published. I guess, I don't know whether they understood how complex it was. I don't know whether there's a clear understanding of what government's moods need to be, as opposed to what industry needs to do. And as I say, I've got clearer about that since delivering the report, in speaking about it. I don't know whether they're trapped in EU versus non-EU. One of those difficult questions. When I was in Whitehall, I used to have a trick question to ask ministers in private, which was, do you think it would be a good thing or a bad thing if the price of housing went down?
Okay.
There is no politically safe answer to that question. If the price of houses goes down, they're more affordable, but people are suddenly put into negative equity.
Yes.
If the price of houses go up, they're unaffordable.
Yeah.
But you have to decide what you want to happen so you can make policy.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And there are consequences of that decision. So the EU decision is politically complex and potentially toxic. And I saw yesterday that Labour has said that it will not change EU legislation, which is an answer, but it does mean that we're then taking rules. One of the points that the report makes is that we had actually been hugely influential, and positively so, in the development of the standards and processes we're talking about.
I can absolutely concur with that. And I did have some numbers. I mean, I was involved in some European standards. Britain, if you take, certainly within construction, Britain contributed far more people, so resource, far more time, far more effort, far more output from manufacturers and other organisations into CEN, into European harmonised standards within our industry than any other European country. And I suspect where we've removed ourselves from that, they are now, they're now, I'm not going to use the word suffering, but they're now feeling the impact of that lack of presence.
It will be surprising if they're not.
Yeah.
There's some political cynicism about that, a belief that actually it's just special interest groups lobbying for a standard that works for them. Don't think that's... it's a very easy allegation.
That wasn't my experience.
No, I don't think it is. I think there's a lack of science in some standards, and there's probably a lack of public sector representation because of cuts. That fire officers don't turn up and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, we were hugely influential in Europe.
Absolutely,
and that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
But hereafter, unless we can come to an accommodation which might not be in their political interest to offer, we will not be influencing the standards. We have to take them. Yeah. We have to wait for them.
Yeah.
So we can do that. I would say that we shouldn't do that because I don't think the system is fit for purpose. And there's no plan that I can aware of with any kind of sensible times. They know it's not fit for purpose, but the timescales like 2040 something to produce something better.
Yeah.
If we don't take our rules from Europe, we have to design something better, and we have to develop and fund the infrastructure that currently exists in Europe, so that cabs work together, that people turn up and contribute to standard setting and so on and so forth. All of that has to happen. So I think that might still be an obstacle to making progress, because that's a difficult decision to make, and it's inevitably become, it seems, party political as well. So I would understand those big questions that probably need to be answered. What is marking going to be a British safety mark or a British quality mark? What does the industry think it should be? Or is it just what it is now, which is kind of to stop people competing on an uneven playing field? I imagine that's what they're struggling with.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I think they do need to pay some attention to how cabs have to work. I think that is in their territory. We say in the report, and we slightly dodge how it might be done, we think cabs should owe a public duty in what they do, to give them some power in relationship with the manufacturer. We encountered two kind of views, probably both cynical, of the relationship between cabs and product manufacturers. One was that they are too close, too cosy, that the person who pays the piper calls the tune. And indeed in Deluxe or MHC or G as it probably then was, one of its statements to the Grenfell inquiry was, you should look at the possibility, or almost implied the probability, of there being collusion between manufacturers and testing houses. Don't believe that's a relevant factor. And I made my living for all of my life as a professional consultant, dealing with money. And if my proposition had ever been, give me enough money, I'll give you the answer you want, my business was finished.
Yeah, of course.
And I think most responsible houses feel the same way. But they do need, the opposite view was that they are too powerful, too remote from their customers, too high-handed, too slow, and so on. So it's quite difficult. I don't think you can give them obligations themselves to say a product is safe. Because then they'll test and test and test and test forever and send you the bill.
They just become massively risk averse, and they either don't test that product anymore, they remove themselves from the scheme or the standard, or like you say, they just
send you a bill of £250,000.
Yeah, because
we've decided we need to do 6 more things. So we have to get the standards for testing right that they're required to do, and then that can be monitored.
They call it risk versus value.
Yeah, well, that's a good phrase.
We see that quite often. Is that product group or is that test?
Yeah.
I mean, test methods I think need to be. We feel that they need to be reinforced.
So I think back to your question, the useful thing would be to get an early indication of the direction of travel.
Yeah.
Because whatever they do they're going to consult.
Of course.
And although I saw the suggestion that we would still see secondary legislation this year, I'd be astonished. I can't see how it could be.
There's a general election next year, isn't there?
Well, that's going to come into play, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anything that happens in 2024 is likely for somebody to say, let's kick this can down the road again until a new government has time for it. But it would be good to get direction of travel. We think, and then consult about it. We think marking could perform its purpose.
Yeah.
Or maybe just an open question: do you or do you not want to stay aligned with the EU?
Yeah.
Not an obvious question to throw to the population, rather than for government.
Well, the trouble is that statement. It's so politically charged because, of course, it wings itself straight back to the in or out Brexit vote, doesn't it?
Correct. Yeah. So I'll get back to the question: is the system fit? No.
Yeah. No, it's not.
Do we want to wait for it to be fit? If you like, I wouldn't want to look somebody in the eye who survived Grenfell or lost relatives in Grenfell and say, we've decided to leave this till 2045.
Yeah.
It's shocking what happened. We've looked at it, but we think, things do need to change, but we don't know what they are. We don't know when it'll be.
Yeah.
So, for once, politics might be on the side of doing the right thing at the right time. And I think it would be shocking if we devolve to a situation where we're waiting until 2040-something for a system which is acknowledged in the EU not to function well, either in standards or in testing or any part of the process, to be made better, and to have to agree that with people that we have just said that we don't want to have to agree things with. That would be odd.
Yeah, I mean, revolution generally doesn't deliver the result you quite often think you want, and evolution can take time depending on what it is that you're expecting to evolve. So you could say you want evolution with a slight backdrop of revolution pushing it along, and that's sort of, I suppose, our sort of take is that as long as we keep moving things forward and raising the bar, and it's aligned to what we the markets and the industry we represent, then every time another piece gets dropped into that jigsaw puzzle, it's a step forward.
Correct. Which we know and government doesn't. So and the only difference between evolution and revolution is pace, really, isn't it? In both situations, you need to know what you want to replace with something better. Yeah. And I think that both terms are valid. What I don't always like is the idea of disruption, the call for disruption.
What generally comes from revolution is that you have this massive disruptor, and then there's expectation to put it back together. And quite often, you put it back together in a way that looks very similar to what you smashed to pieces beforehand. Because,
or worse, the only product is disruption.
Yeah,
we could call that the Dominic Cummings effect. Terrific to have revolutionary people who say that the status quo is not good enough. Yeah, but you have to replace it with something considered as better, rather than just say BS 476 straight away.
Yeah, what's in its place, and actually, our thing about you mentioned the victims and the relatives of the victims, is our response to that is to do something better every day as a trade association that represents that significant part of the industry, because actually the legacy we can leave to improve from what happened is to reduce the number of those events in terms of years, and reduce the quantum of people that are affected by it, because I'm not sure if we'll ever get to a point where nothing ever goes wrong. Yeah. People fly in aeroplanes all over the world. The reason why it's one of the safest forms of travel is there's a whole legacy of things that went terribly wrong beforehand that people learnt from and improved standards on. So, our mantra is that what we can do for that, what happened in that situation, is to improve and raise the bar every day that we're doing what we're doing.
I think air crash is instructive, by the way, and there was a reference in the review to them.
Yeah.
One of my guilty pleasures was watching air crash investigation on National Geographic to see what happens in aircraft. I actually shared a conference platform with somebody.
Which Emirates actually has on their channel when you're sat.
Is it?
Yes.
When you're sitting on an airplane.
I found it by accident, and I found it quite unnerving, actually. But
too late to relax. Too late to do anything about it. Relax. But they really do. And we have an air crash investigation board. We have a marine incident investigation board. We have a rail incident investigation board.
Yeah.
We don't have any standing arrangement for buildings, and we probably should. And somebody in the government said to me that would be expensive. But actually, the Grenfell inquiry's probable cost would pay for an air crash investigation board for 50 years.
I was going to say, so what are we at? 1.2?
It was headed for 2, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So, and they've got to do their job properly. So be it. But I think there were two legacy issues, aren't there? When we're talking about the Grenfell, so they must have been so sick of everybody starting every statement with an apology. I must express my regret. They don't really want any more regret from people whom they saw as causing the harm.
No. No. They want
resolution. Sanction. Well, they want, first of all, they want to know that something's happened in respect to people who misbehaved. But I think you have to leave that to other authorities.
Yes.
But they also want to know, or we all need to know, that it isn't going to happen again if we're capable of avoiding it.
Yeah.
And in all our conversations within the industry, not just in connection with this work, the word that does keep coming up, cliche that is shocked. I think we were all shocked by the extent of failure. System failure and the scale of it. The number of, if it was a kind of a child who died in care, we'd have said, look at all these opportunities that were missed to save that child's life.
Yes.
And all the opportunities missed to save the life of those people was deeply shocking.
It was, and I think the King's Cross disaster. Because again, you could sort of level the same question to ourselves: is we missed opportunities. The amount of litter that accumulated under escalators, and the fact that the escalators were made of wood and clagged in grease.
Should have spot that, shouldn't we?
And the fact that you could still smoke in the ticket halls and things on the underground, and you could probably say that. The underground network in London, from a fire safety point of view, is unrecognisably better, and it's a safer environment to be in from a fire point of view than it was before King's Cross, because it changed everything.
And indeed, a lot of what we have as regulation, and I'll expand on that a bit, comes from disaster. Lifeboats on ships because of Titanic. The measures we take for fire protection and oil rigs and so on. I think there's a category error made in thinking about regulation. I think the kind of regulation that wants to know about your business and how many people of a certain age you've got, and and how many hours they all work and so on, and proving that. And what your credentials are for sustainability and so on. A lot of that kind of informational stuff is, I think, what people react to. But to call standard setting red tape is a category error. And I think it's one that governments have drifted into, thinking that anything that you say about how you should do something is called regulation. But actually, it stimulates, in my experience, innovation in industry.
Yes, it does.
Your product has to do this.
Yes.
Not has to be made like this, but it has to do this. Then in a little study on building products some years ago, and it seemed actually that regulation was one of the primary stimuli for innovation, because now it has to perform in this way, and your competitors have to meet the same standard. How can I do it better than them? Cheaper than them, faster than them, different from them, whatever it is. So I think there's no doubt that Grenfell is a legacy of a reluctance to regulate, and I think that comes from, as I say, a category error. Telling you that you must meet a certain standard is not red tape.
No,
unless it's wasteful, and not necessarily to meet that standard to deliver a social good.
Yeah, no, you're right. So one of the other questions was, and I'm hoping we're sort of covering all of the bases. The question's coming in, your best guess on safety critical products. Could we highlight that certain products may not be safety critical by themselves, e.g. fire-rated board, but they form a very critical fire system as a component.
Yep.
I think we sort of touched on that, with the difference between a system as in a finished thing and then a culmination of different products. And I think you covered the fact that it could be nigh on impossible to test every different variation of application. Do you think there's a minimum requirement for that in terms of testing? And bearing in mind, quite often with some of these, there may not be the appropriate testing method or regime.
Well, if the absence of a good regime represents a severe risk to the public, then we have to fix it.
Yeah.
Not going to be quick, and not going to be easy, and anybody's ever suggested that it would be. But as I say, my opening instincts about both the general safety requirement and safety critical were that they were flawed concepts because we can't define them. And I've come full circle because of the potential for those things to do so much heavy lifting. As I say, you need a general safety requirement because how could you object to it, and how else would you cover every product and put some obligation on the manufacturers to make sure it doesn't represent an unacceptable risk. Now we must define what you should do to satisfy that requirement. Reasonable skill and care. The courts will decide ultimately, but the first thing they'll look at is what do you say as an industry? And they'll look to trade association guidance, they'll look to the standards, and so on. So there's actually quite a powerful position for those who write guidance.
Yeah.
And as long as they bear in mind the long-term public interest rather than short-term commercial interest for their members, that will represent the beginnings of a much better world.
Yes.
But as I say, if you know then that you might be in breach of that and that there's some accountability for that, that's not enough if the consequences of a breach is so serious. So you can't again argue with the idea of some things being safety critical in certain uses, in certain places. And I don't think it's enough to end the conversation that, well, some products are perfectly safe in one situation and not in another, so what? Do you want everything to be treated as if it's safety critical? Because it might be. And I think the work done by the CIOB and the RIBA is quite helpful in terms of starting to look at safety critical products in the context of their elemental use in the building.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, who can solve this problem but us? Who can start to say, these things in this use are safety critical, and if they're used in this way, which we define, they should be susceptible to this kind of verification that the public can have faith in, and that government can therefore have a faith in representing the people. Down to us. But the category, I think, has to exist. One of the many, I watched your podcast with Chandru, and one of the many points which are common, I think, a lot of points of agreement between us. But that's one that you can't, either in principle or in practice, I think, dispel the idea that some things are safety critical.
Yeah.
Nor can you then say, but it's too difficult because they're only critical in certain uses and not in others. And so, so when you use something in a fire door, or in a fire compartment, what do we now say about it? What should happen to it to demonstrate that it's safe? That's for us, again, to say.
Because it's been used in a different application to maybe what
and maybe then for government
to
say that is so important that we're going to make it regulatory.
Yeah, I agree. And interesting you talk about architects, and of course one of the areas we're focused on is in improving the skills and the knowledge of the design community in passive fire as a discipline and a science, because we've become very aware over the years that they probably in their early years in education at university, it's not an area they cover particularly well or at all. I mean, we're getting feedback that out of 3 years in your part one, you cover a day, and a day is not enough in this very complex part of construction. It touches many facets. It has many different elements to it, and as you rightly said earlier on, there's different levels of performance. Is it integrity? We're protecting from penetration of heat from a fire side to non-fire side of a compartment wall. Is it insulation or is it radiance? There's radiance in itself. Radiant heat kilowatts per square metre per hour. That in itself is a science of how you develop a design that supports that. Smoke control, we work very closely with an organisation called the Smoke Control Association. The management of hot smoke or ambient smoke in ambient conditions. Ambient smoke kills more people than hot smoke. Why? Because hot smoke rises because it has energy and buoyancy and wants to find the highest point via the rate of loose resistance. When it's cooled and starts to fall to finished floor is actually when it's far more dangerous. Those guys are constantly working on how they improve how smoke leaves a building to create clear zones for people to leave or the services to come in a safe condition. But there's a whole science behind that I personally, and as an organisation, don't believe that is covered well enough within the design and engineering.
So I think the challenge I would lay down for you then is, what do you think would be enough?
Yeah.
I'm partly because I'm quite interested in the idea of being an architect when I was young, but lacked the creative talent, so headed off to a very different territory. I have huge admiration for a lot of what they do.
Yes.
And also huge sympathy for how much they're expected to know.
And that's the challenge, because, of course, now we're back into this principal designer, of course. The levy of responsibility of the principal designer has been laid out.
Yeah, so we need to be realistic about how capable, maybe we can sue them all, prosecute them all, whatever.
Yeah, but then you have no architects.
Well, correct. Yeah. So and I think, I'm sure they'd be very offended if I reduced their core skill to the handling of effective space. That's what they really do. They really know how to lay out effective space.
Well, they create environments.
Correct. And you could expand that and so on. But fundamentally, what they're good at doing is handling 3 dimensions.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they need to know everything else.
Of course.
Yeah. So if they only spend a day on passive fire, we could double their skills by making it 2, couldn't we?
Exactly.
But how much do they need to know? And the other critical question, I think, is what can they rely upon in the way of others? Because they can't know everything.
No.
Somebody said to me, shouldn't they be responsible for checking, when they saw a declaration of performance that it had been properly prepared? Well, no. They have to be able to have faith in something. And if a system that says, I don't believe anything I'm told until I've proved it myself, means they've all got to have a testing lab and so on. No. Yeah. So how much do they really need to know? And what can they trust in terms of stuff given to them by others as a way of satisfying their duty of care in making safe buildings? Because God knows that, I doubt that very few of them know anything about how to make safe use of insulation made of popcorn.
Yeah, I know it might make a nice wall covering when you go into reception as a feature wall, but even that poses a serious risk.
I don't want to reduce their skills to the decorative, because they go far beyond that.
Yes,
but there are, I can't remember how many practices there are in the UK, but the vast majority of them are 1 or 2 people. They're not going to be designing high-rise towers and so on for the most part. But maybe the next move is there's huge crowding in the curriculum.
Yes.
I did a thing for DWP some years ago in trying to get a greater awareness designing for the disabled in the broader sense of that expression into architectural education. And when you looked at the crowding of and they did that I think in one lesson in the whole
proof
3
document
years.
M, isn't it? Access to and use
of
buildings.
but it's almost pre-M. But it was, and I remember one architect saying, "Oh yeah, we did ramps and rails. Just design the whole thing." On a Thursday afternoon just before we finish. So, that's not enough. But what would be enough? You're better able to advise, ARB or whoever looks at this stuff these days. What's the least an architect should know? What are the questions they should ask? And what can they trust when they're told it?
What disabilities are they having to cater for is probably the first
in that world,
question.
But bringing it back to our subject of the day, how much do they really need to know about fire? Because if you look at the expert evidence given to the Grenfell inquiry by serious fire specialists, mind-blowing.
Yeah. And it is a complex, and I think that's what we found in the bigger practices, is you tend to find that although they're all principally architects, there'll be some architects that specialise in certain areas. So there'll be somebody on approved document who spends their time constantly learning about approved document A or B, or K, or L, M, And they will be the go-to architect in that practice for everybody else, because they're the one that has done lots of CPDs, done a training course, maybe done some IFE exams and got some qualifications in fire. And that's how the bigger practices tend to do it. But as you say, I mean, if you did the 80-20 split, I mean, 80% of architects are small practices or people that work in a home office in the back garden.
And it's probably enough for almost everything they do.
So they can't do everything. They're not the Zaha Hadids and these other types of practices.
I wouldn't confidently name more than 10 practices that have the kind of internal skill you're talking about. A genuine technical department. I talked to one or two during the preparation of this report. And hugely impressive individuals. Who had a complete grasp of it, and were finding it a difficult world to navigate. And it was interesting to know what their difficulties were. But tiny number of practices have that kind of resource.
I mean, Sir Norman Foster has critical engineering departments because the quantum of number of employees that work there it supports that. So does Hadid's, and there's a number of others you could probably name.
So a realism about who needs to know what and how much they need to know about it. Is part of a competency framework, is acknowledging that you can't be competent in everything.
No, that's right.
But if you're going to put your name to this, what should you know before you're allowed to sign it? And also, say, fundamentally, what can be trusted and how could it be make stuff that they rely upon trustworthy is part, I think, of this whole exercise. Yeah,
and we were talking to Andrea from Women Talking Fire, who's come in a couple of times, and she referred to the phrase about knowing your limitations, and it's a phrase that seems to have, it's not disappeared, but it's not at the forefront. Skills, knowledge, experience, behaviour, and also know your limitations of what your skills and knowledge and experience and your leading to your behaviours are. And
it's a key qualification for professional behaviour. And by the way, I draw no distinction between professional behaviour and long-term commercial behaviour.
No.
And very little between professional institutions.
Well, the expectations should be the same, shouldn't they?
Yeah, you don't take on things that you don't know how to do.
No, that's why I don't fly an aeroplane. Going back to the original conversation, you wouldn't want me to, because I'm not qualified. In terms of we mentioned some of the certification, but in your view, and I know you sort of mentioned this particular part of the industry in your executive summary of the report. What do you feel the role of the laboratories and third-party certifiers should be moving forward? Because they're critical to this, and they have to be more part of the solution.
They do. And I think I draw some distinction, although not a terribly hard one, between the regulatory statutory process and the voluntary one. As far as the formal is concerned, the regulatory one, I've already said that I think the people doing testing or assessment in the broader sense, I keep being reminded by UCAS that testing is only a small part of verification. I think they need to owe a public duty. There are then some quite specific things which are in the review about taking some of the glitches out of the system. For example, I think I don't endorse the idea of publishing negative test results, failed test results, because as a consumer, I'm not sure what I'm being told. I seem to be being told this has passed the test, but you might not want to believe it because it's failed in the past. I need to know that it's passed the test because it should.
Yeah.
So I don't think failed test information is very valuable. I do think, though, that a house should know if something has been tested before and failed. That they should know, and what's happened since to change it so that it won't fail again. And I think they should also know if something's being tested by another house at the same time. In other words, gaming the system should be absolutely at least transparent, and that's with a view to eliminating it.
There's another level to that we can pick up on in a minute, but I agree. I think it's the transparency between the laboratories and the certification bodies of products and installers as to whether they've been, who has supported them as a lab or a cert body, and if they left one and went to another, why? Now that brings in a whole series of questions and challenges, because of course there's laws about creating lists,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
people or companies that. But the general consensus should be there should be greater transparency between the organisations.
Yeah. And I think everything should be available to the regulator. I mean, you can make lots of excuses about commercial confidentiality and so on and so forth, and GDPR. You can go a long list of reasons why you don't want to collaborate. Everything has to be discoverable by the regulator in the event of incident, given reasonable cause. So there's a whole series of things that I think would try and eliminate some of the weaknesses in the system, increase the transparency of it. There are recommendations about the product of that process. You talked about reports where you might find 40 pages on that something actually only survived for 9 minutes.
Yeah.
And again, the industry, I think, could come up with a better sort of a standard suite of documentation, so that an architect, again, what can they trust, knows what they should be looking at. So there's something between not checking at all, which seems to be too often the evidence of Grenfell, and being expected to read everything. Whilst I was in France, I bought a bag of lime to do some repointing. And when I clicked on it on site to order it on a click and collect basis, I was referred to a 180-page safety document.
Okay, because it's
before
a bag
I
of
could
lime.
use it.
So face mask, eye protection,
on and on and
gloves.
on and on, yeah. And actually, on another site, they said to me, this stuff is caustic.
Yes.
Wear protective clothing.
Yes.
Wear goggles, wear gloves, and wash your clothes before you use them again. That's probably almost all of it.
Yes.
So you have to have some sympathy with an architect presented with 180 pages before they can specify.
Before they pick up a bag of lime.
Can we reduce this to what really matters?
Yeah.
And the same thing is true of the general safety requirement, where the risk is we get massive extraneous self-protective information. So I think there's work to do there. As far as the schemes which are not statutory are concerned, I think they are hugely important. They fit absolutely into our framework of reasonable skill and care. How would you demonstrate that? Well, we've got a scheme, and we're required to follow it. But again, we need a template. What are the components of a good third-party scheme? So that maybe it gets some kind of official endorsement, but at least so that the industry as a whole agrees that a scheme that's designed in this way is a pretty good start to using reasonable skill and care to serve the public interest. And again, the report sets out what the bones of such a proposal might look like, should be consulted, and we don't need to wait for that. A trade association to trade association. There have been meetings in the past which got abandoned because government's priorities shifted in looking at what a good scheme might look like. What are we waiting for? Because I think it's critical to developing a world that isn't prescriptively regulatory. Group by group, we should be getting on with that.
No, I agree.
And in our industry, what does a good scheme look like?
Indeed. And I think we know what that looks like. But actually, I think we would benefit from contributors further up and down the design. We don't see many architects sitting in, British standards committees. We don't see many specialists representing the tier 1 and tier 2 contractors sitting in these types of things. On the other side of that, we do see contribution from local authority building control officers, because they're we're very much at the coalface of this thing, as much members of approved inspectors, engineers from organisations like CABE and RICS, etc. They tend to contribute. But then further down, facilities management. Facilities management is a huge industry now. Certainly hardcore, which is building and etc. We don't see many of that industry represented, and in these types of groups. And as much as you don't see residents organisations being represented, the issue of fire doors and things in these buildings of multiple occupancy. I mean, I went to the site of the fire back not long after it happened, because there's actually a much lower level estate of sort of 2-3 level masonettes with these internal almost masonette style, but these internal corridors with front doors opening onto these walkways and they found that a lot of the windows you have to as part of your your means of escape, you have to walk past on across this raised walkway. You walk past your kitchen window which is a standard UPVC double glazed, albeit frosted window. But actually, the likelihood of the fire, where's the predominant area of the fire is going to start in?
Kitchens.
It's the kitchen. So you've now got to leave your 2-bed, 3rd-storey masonette, go out the front door and walk along this walkway past the window. So they were looking at this and decided whether they were going to change it all out for fire rating, and then they opted to put the fire curtain systems over these windows, so they would deploy. The detector would be on the inside, but it would deploy over the outside, and meant you created a tenable zone for you to walk past. And when we were there, one of the company that had been commissioned to do this work had also done an assessment of all the doors, and a lot of the doors were not up to standard. No. They probably were at the time when they were fitted, in 1985 or something. But some had been taken off and new hinges put on. Some had letter boxes, with non-fire rated letter plates and things. So of course, as time goes on, they get modified. And of course, this is the problem: is that quite often people they call a tradesperson in to do works, and they don't realise actually what the net outcome of what they've done is to limit or lower the performance or strike off the performance of that wall or that door or something. The other thing they've been working on.
Well, we can't cover everything.
No, you can't
instantaneously. But the new duties on these people will slowly make them realise. If you're an accountable person now, and you've got a note from a tenant saying, fire doors won't shut. There's rubbish in the corridor and so on. Eventually, you will wake up to that. So I do think, and I'm not naive about it, but I do think that slowly, clear duties, knowing how to perform up to them, and facing consequences if you don't, will start to change behaviours. It's not all about a stick, but I think it's a more focused issue in a business than the more abstract idea of culture.
Yeah.
So I hope that slowly these things will be pulled through, and of course, we go back to compartments. Lots of compartments, I suspect, start out life being a compartment.
Yes.
But finish up not being, because of
holes.
The same is true of rock, as we learned recently. It's too easy to alter, and suddenly steel's exposed to it, reinforcements exposed to weather and so on. So. It's a big business, building, designing, building,
it is,
occupying,
and maintaining is
correct.
Yeah,
we're shocking at maintenance, and government's shocking at maintenance, regards buildings as liabilities rather than assets, and neglects them.
I did read a report a few years ago on the Houses of Parliament, and the report on the proposed, upgrade, what they needed to do to bring it up to and. I'm not sure I'd want to be reading that report at the time. I'm not sure if I'd have wanted to be in the Houses of Parliament if the fire alarm went off. If I'm being perfectly honest.
No, they're probably in blissful ignorance, lots of them.
So,
but as ever in life, you're faced with a difficult problem.
Of course you are.
You have to put the decisions down and make one.
Yeah.
And my partners, used to say in business, can't we stop all these initiatives and Alzheimer's? To which the answer was, well, only if you can satisfy that you're acting compliantly at all times. So your customers are totally satisfied, and your competitors, you promise me your competitors won't come up with a better offer. Yeah. Then you can stop. But however difficult a problem is, you have to choose. So Houses of Parliament, fix it or knock it down.
Yeah.
Do you want to be the guy who puts his name on knocking it down?
Wow.
So fix it.
Yeah.
Difficult problem.
Which I know they are doing, aren't they? There's a huge amount.
We tend to drift along hoping there'll be an answer we haven't thought of yet.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. You have to choose from the options you can think of.
Yeah, and of course, Windsor Castle is a very different building now after the fire.
Yeah. Because like King's Cross Underground Station.
King's Cross Underground.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've covered all the sort of questions really that came through of any of interest or reasonable content, I suppose. Moving forward, we're clearly going to hopefully see some outcomes from the report, because otherwise, it would be a wasted opportunity, and that's certainly our view. And we hope a couple of things really. One, we hope when we do get some feedback on this next year, it'd be great if you could come back and talk about where we think where it's got to and how you see it sort of developing further. But on the basis of I suppose us and our members, we pretty much all of our members are the manufacturers, installers, or testers, or certifiers, or engineers, or designers of passive. And it's probably the answer is probably slightly different to each one. But as an overarching statement, what would be your message to the passive fire industry moving forward?
What do you think in your particular part of the industry you need to do to satisfy yourself that you are producing a product or an installation that's safe? And I would hope that we would ask that question right across the industry, and that we would do so in a coordinated and coherent way. So we don't produce, as I say again, bits of the answer or very different answer, other than where that's absolutely essential because of the nature of the work. We don't need government to tell us this. We shouldn't need it. They might decide that some of it's so important that it should become regulatory. That's their choice. But that doesn't actually change our view of how important it is to do things differently so that they are safe. All the time, what should we do, what should we do, what should we do? And if the duties are clear in the future, if the government makes their duties clear, enforces them, and there are sanctions for being outside them, I think you've got the kit that will start to make a change. I would still add learning our lessons, air crash investigation, a machine for feedback and so on. We absolutely need that so we can learn our lessons, and we've got some structure through which we can do that. And trade associations will play a part in that as well. But don't expect government to tell us what safe means. We know that. And as I say, if we take the long-term interests of our end customers in use, and everybody between them and us in the supply chain, rather than short-term commercial interests, I think the occupants of tower blocks in the future can feel safer.
Great. Well, Paul Morrell and Annalise Day in her absence, thank you for the report. It's been very enlightening. And today, obviously, thanks for coming in and giving us, having a chat and giving us your thoughts.
It's been good. As you gather, keen to give the report an afterlife, and as Annalisa is, to bring it through some results. And I look forward to an editing of this that makes it far more coherent than it was.
Well, there's an old saying, the camera never lies. But what I can assure you is that editors do have that capability, positively and negatively. So we'll see what mood our editor is in at the time that they put this together.
I will rely on his good grace.
Of course, he is very graceful. So again, thanks for coming in. We do appreciate your time and talking to us, and our members and the wider community, who we have an awful lot of people who watch these now.
Good.
Hopefully that will give them some benefit. I think what will give benefit is obviously that positive outcomes come out from the report, and everything starts to, the bar gets raised yet further.
That's a shared wish. So thanks for asking, and onward and upward.
Thank you.